All right, let's talk about aggression. I want to throw out there that this lecture is not intended to be standalone. This is intended to build on previous information, and taking pieces of this out of context can be very, very dangerous for both the dogs you're working with, the people you're working with, and the people this dog will meet in the future, and the other animals this dog will meet in the future. So please, if you haven't watched the rest of the videos in this series, please make sure that you're watching all of them. Do not take this one out of context. Do not watch just this one specifically. Because aggression is a very popular topic, unfortunately, a very misunderstood topic, and a very difficult one to work with potentially, depending on the details of it, obviously. So let's talk about aggression. First of all, we need to define aggression. I've stated in earlier videos that I hate the word aggression. I don't like the kind of blanket statement of aggression. I strongly prefer that you tell me exactly what the dog did. What is the dog doing that you're defining as aggression? Because a lot of the time people will mischaracterize behavior as aggression, or they've been told that their dog is being dominant and that means that the dog is aggressive, or they'll make some sort of connection between like puppy mouthy behavior and aggression. Aggression has become such a weird nebulous term that doesn't really have a great definition amongst the general public. So whenever we talk about aggression, I want us to really be mindful and define what we're talking about when we say aggression. When I say aggression, I'm talking about agonistic displays. Agonistic displays means that we're talking about conflict behaviors. We're talking about behaviors that are intended to resolve some sort of disagreement, and resolution being really important there. So this might be things like growling, lunging, snapping, biting. This could be whale eye, which is like looking outside of your eye. Hard stare, ears back, ears forward, tail tuck, tail wag. Like it can really be anything, right? We've got some opposite things going on here. Ears back and ears forward. Well, both of them can be aggression, but they're kind of different things. Tail tucked, tail wagging. Potentially different things. Like I can have a tucked wagging tail, or I can have a high wagging tail. There's different things happening there, and it's not really helpful to lump all of those into one category, because we're talking about a wide range of behavior and a wide range of reasons for the behavior. And when we dive into treating this behavior, we need to get really specific about why it's happening. Otherwise, we risk just suppressing the behavior and not addressing the emotional response or the emotional reaction to the stimulus, which is what's really, really important when we're treating aggression, when we actually want to treat aggression, not just manage it, not just suppress the behavior, but actually address the root of why the dog is doing this, the biological response that is triggering the behavior. If we want to change that, we need to go deeper than just aggression. All right. We're going to categorize aggression here. We're going to classify this again, referencing this textbook, Handbook of Applied Dog Training Behavior, Volume 3, specifically by Stephen R. Lindsay. All three of them are very helpful, but this is a great one. I really, really like this definition of aggression. It's one that I have leaned on a lot in my career. Even if we're using different language, a lot of people that I've talked to, or most people that I talk to, tend to kind of classify aggression in these two ways, even if we're using slightly different language to talk about it. So the first category, this book defines two types of aggression. And kind of how I think about aggression when I'm taking on aggression cases is first step is categorizing into one of these two categories. So the first category is offensive or defensive aggression. Now you'll often hear this just called defensive aggression, and then we'll put offensive in a different category. I personally like putting both of these together because both of them can be rooted in kind of logic. Offensive or defensive aggression is a sequence of events that are meant to decrease or to resolve conflict. So here's a sequence here of the order that I should see the behaviors in. We should see agonistic arousal. That is heart rate increasing. That's that biological response before my conscious brain kicks in. It's the tail either raising up and kind of wagging stiff like this, or even kind of wagging big like that. Don't just look at the tail. You need to look at the full picture. So I've got a dog who is standing with a very tall posture, kind of chest almost puffing out, head's high, ears are forward, tail's up, and it's wagging kind of like this, and they're chest to chest with their dog. That's that agonistic arousal paired with some precursor intention movements. Those movements that say, hey, I think that there's a fight going on here. I think there's conflict here. And I don't want to escalate to a full fight. Really important here when we talk about defensive aggression, when we talk about offensive or defensive aggression, this first category here, this sequence of events. This sequence of events is there to try to avoid getting to the actual fight. The sequence of events is trying to resolve this conflict without an actual fight. Because the reality is that fighting is expensive. Anybody that has done any level of combat sport knows how exhausting it is. I mean, professional fighting matches are very, very short, right? They're measured in minutes. And these are professional athletes that are trained to do this. Fighting is expensive. It is hard work on my body, and it's very risky to engage in. We know this on a very animal sort of level. We know that fighting is expensive, and I would like to do what I can to avoid it. Most of the cases that you work with are going to fall into this category. Most of the cases that you're working with, when we're talking about offensive or defensive aggression, they're going to fall into this category. It's rooted in logic. It's rooted in, I think there's conflict. This is me trying to resolve conflict, even if not every step is a logical step, even if some of them are just happening because of my response to the environment or because of my body's automatic reaction to something. There's a pattern to this. There's some sort of conscious thought there. So you got that precursor intention movements. We've got ritualized threats. That's the growling. That's the posturing. That's the, hey, it's the like little chest bump or something. It's the, also could be like the curling up, right? I keep doing this, but it could also be the opposite. It could be curling up in the back. It could be baring our teeth, really serious, baring just in front of my teeth versus baring all of my teeth, or I'm trying to make a big threat display. Then we move to formalized interaction conducive to conflict resolution. Remember, we're trying to avoid an actual fight here. We're doing what we can to avoid an actual fight. Fighting is expensive. So it's conducive to conflict resolution. It might result in a confrontation or it might result in an attack. This category of aggression does not, I'm not going to put something outside this category just because it escalated to an actual conflict. Okay. The problem with this is that humans are really, really good at getting rid of these earlier sequences here. These first couple of steps up here, this agonistic arousal, these precursor intention movements, the growl, the posture, the uncomfortable posture, we're really good at ignoring those things. Really, really good at it. We're really good at teaching the dog that those things don't work. And what happens when we ignore behavior? Back in that extinction lecture, we ignore behavior, it goes away. So when we're looking for this sequence of events, I need to ask about a full history, because if those behaviors existed at some point, but I've just ignored them, so the dog has learned not to do them, well, then I might still be talking about this category of aggression. I still might be talking about defensive aggression. I've just trained some of the behaviors out of it on accident. All right, one of the other defining features of this category of aggression is a demonstrated ability. The dog has demonstrated the ability to escalate, de-escalate, or cancel this this step-by-step, this sequence. So going back and looking at this, if those precursor intention movements do what I want them to do, they start resolving the conflict, I go back down to that agonistic arousal level. Likewise, if we're at that formalized interaction that's conducive to conflict resolution, so that little like muzzle punch, little strike, little muzzle punch, we're at that level, and the other dog or the person's like, oh, sorry, that dog backs up, right? I didn't want to actually fight. I'm letting you know that I don't want to fight. I'm backing up. We can, or even just, I'm just going to hold my position, not advance towards you. So a demonstrated ability to escalate and de-escalate through that process. Again, we want to ask about full history whenever possible. We'll talk about sheltering a little bit differently, actually. There's a full different lecture series coming that's all about sheltering and kind of specific considerations when we're working with dogs where we don't have a full history. But whenever possible, I want to identify as much of that history as I can to see if that once existed or if it never has existed. Another defining feature of this category of aggression is that there's context appropriateness between the trigger, the stimulus that triggered this, and the magnitude of the attack, of the conflict, of the bite, of whatever it is. So I walk up to a dog that I've known for a while, and I reach out and I'm like, "Hi, dog, nice to meet you." And I rudely put out my hand and put it right in the dog's face, which is not how we want to greet dogs, by the way. Reach out, put my hand out like this, tell the dog, sniff my hand, kind of take that dog's space from them. And the dog mauls my hand. I need significant reconstructive surgery to put my hand back together. That's not really appropriate, right? We want to ask about all the factors, all the context factors that could be there. We want to ask about, well, does the dog have a history of telling you to stop doing that and you haven't listened in the past? So the dog is responding at a level that they deem appropriate. Could it be that historically, when people reached out their hand like that, that led to significant conflict between that person and the dog? In which case, that might be an appropriate response. It's unlikely that that's an appropriate response, even given a lot of factors, but possible. So I want to find out, was the context where this bite occurred or where this agonistic behavior occurred, this conflict behavior occurred, was this appropriate to the response, the dog's response? Most of the time, the answer is yes. Most of the time in these cases, the answer is yes. Most of the time, I have provoked the dog to get to this point. Responses are inhibited. So another factor that might suggest that we're dealing with offensive or defensive aggression is the response is inhibited. This conflict behavior, that agonistic behavior, that aggression is inhibited. So remember, biting is expensive. I don't want to go straight to a mauling. That's really, really expensive for my body. That's a lot of physical exertion. It's also putting myself at serious risk because if I'm mortally injuring something, it has no reason to not fight back with every single thing it's got and potentially mortally injure me as well. So we want responses to be inhibited. Something I tell my students and something that I have found to be true every time is that I've never, ever had a dog try to bite me and not succeed. I've had many dogs. Well, I've had not many. I don't want to say like I get bit all the time or like I have dogs threatening to bite me all the time because that's not really true. The dogs that have ever tried to bite me, they were not actually trying to bite me. They were threatening to bite. They were lunging towards me. The only dogs that have ever tried to bite and not been successful are dogs that were behind a fence or dogs that were physically stopped from doing it. Anytime that a dog snaps towards you and doesn't quite make contact, unless they were physically restrained from doing that, they were not trying to bite you. They were trying to threaten, to say, hey, I mean business. I will escalate to this point if you don't stop what you're doing. That is an inhibited response. The dog's holding back a little bit. Same thing goes for bites. A lot of bites are pretty mild. A lot of bites are like one tooth. One tooth actually breaks skin. Sometimes we've got just two canines breaking skin, and then maybe a little line from the front teeth here. It's very rare that we get a full bite, top two, bottom two, and like more injuries from the rest of the teeth. And even more uncommon for us to have a full-scale bite where the dog actually grabs, bears down, and pulls. And then we get some lacerations or we get removal of flesh. Those are uninhibited, generally speaking. Those are like uninhibited bites. Most of the time our bites are inhibited. They are a quick strike. It's a tooth puncture or two teeth puncture, but there's not like dragging lines or anything in those bites. Those are inhibited. So those would probably fall under this defensive aggression category. Most importantly for me, when I'm asking for a history, when I'm asking about what was the context of this bite, what was the context of this reported aggression, I'm looking for functional significance. I'm looking for this behavior, this conflict behavior, to actually be within the context of conflict. You're in your kennel, you're at the back of the kennel, you're growling at me, you're telling me to back up. I don't back up. I keep walking into the kennel to tell you that we're leaving and to get you and pull you out. That's conflict. We are in disagreement about what we're doing next. That's conflict. And if that dog lunges and snaps at me, that behavior, the lunging and snapping, it served a functional purpose. It was trying to tell me to back up, stop doing what I'm doing. That's functional significance. It could be a defensive response to aversive stimulation. Anything the dog does not like is aversive. So if I'm using something in training that the dog does not like, and the dog responds using some form of aggression, some form of agonistic behavior, some form of conflict behavior, might be appropriate. The dog saying, hey, stop. Again, there's a functional significance to it. And I like the rest of the definition here saying it's a response to that aversive stimulation or the threat of aversive stimulation. If I've told you, if I've taught you, dog, that when I do this, there's something that you don't like coming, I should expect when I do that, I could provoke an aggressive response. I can provoke that conflict behavior. Again, we're in disagreement. I'm going to do this. The dog says, I don't want that. If I don't listen to that, if I don't listen to that communication, I should expect some level of conflict. So we want to ask, whenever we're looking at aggressive behavior, we want to ask, what is the function of the behavior? What does the dog want? What is the dog asking for? What is the dog communicating by doing this? What is the function of this behavior? That is so much more relevant than you being able to say, oh, the dog is aggressive. Even the dog's behavior is aggressive. A little bit better, but not much. Tell me what the function of the behavior is. Well, the dog growled and snapped because I kept walking towards it and he kept growling to tell me to back up, and I didn't back up. That tells me a lot. Ask, what is the function? That's going to tell you quite a bit about whether this is that offensive or defensive aggression or impulsive aggression. So reactive, impulsive, autoprotective, always the same thing. Impulsive aggression is what I tend to say. Impulsive aggression, I think it fits a lot better. I don't like reactive aggression because we say dog reactive a lot and we're not talking about the same thing there at all. Dog reactive, another really big category of a lot of behaviors that are all rooted in kind of different things potentially. And usually dog reactive does not mean that they're not dog social. A lot of dogs that are dog reactive are actually very dog social. They just don't like being on leash. They don't like seeing other dogs on leash, or they feel a loss of control there, but separate topic. So I like impulsive aggression for this category. So we have offensive or defensive aggression for our first category. Our second category is impulsive aggression. Impulsive aggression has a lack of sequential organization. So remember we talked about that sequence, that agonistic arousal, that precursor intention movements, that process that builds up to a full display of like an attack or full conflict. This impulsive aggression has a lack of sequential organization. There wasn't really a rhyme or reason to it. The dogs seemed fine 1 second and then they weren't the next second. This is extremely rare. I want to emphasize that. This category of aggression represents if you ask me, this is my personal bias. I'm not citing anything here. If you ask me, my personal bias, coming from background in animal sheltering and also doing private dog training, this type of aggression is incredibly rare. And generally speaking, when we decide that this is what we're talking about, we're generally talking about a really, really high level of management or euthanasia. Because we're talking about behavior that doesn't actually have a kind of purpose to it. It's a like miswiring of the brain, essentially. We've got things connecting in the brain that shouldn't be connecting. And that's not to say that this is always genetic. This can be environmentally influenced. This can be, unfortunately, taught. So there's a lack of sequential organization. The dog might not show any early signs that they are uncomfortable, and suddenly they lash out with a response that is disproportionate. It's uninhibited and it's disproportionate to the stimulus. That is impulsive aggression. Again, we want to ask about a full history. A lot of people will say it came out of nowhere, and that's not actually the case. This comes up a lot. People will say, well, it came out of nowhere. I'm looking at the dog in front of me saying, this dog is right now telling me they're uncomfortable, and you're not recognizing this dog is uncomfortable. This did not come out of nowhere. You just didn't read the warning signs. Very different. So we want to ask a lot of questions about what the behavior looks like and whether the person that was observing this has the skills to read this effectively. So uninhibited, out of character, and disproportionate. By the way, when we're looking at things like this, we want to get a medical consult first and foremost, because there are some seizure disorders that can cause behavior that look really similar to this. If you're not familiar with seizure disorders in dogs, know that they can look very different than what you might be imagining. The first dog seizure that I saw, I would not have recognized as a seizure, unless there was not an RVT that sent me the video of it saying, hey, my foster dog is having seizures. I would not have recognized it as a seizure. They don't always look they don't look like what you think they do sometimes. The problem with impulsive aggression, the problem with attacks that are escalating to this level, this disproportionate level to it's disproportionate stimulus, it doesn't have a function to it. It's literally just like a biological process takes over. There's not a sequence of events to it. It's not trying to accomplish something. The problem with these is that they tend to increase in frequency and severity over time. So if I'm seeing these early signs now, which if I'm seeing early signs, I'm probably dealing with offensive or defensive aggression. If I'm seeing some of these things building now, if I'm seeing these uncharacteristic attacks, these disproportionate attacks that are totally out of character for this dog, if I'm seeing them, the odds are decent that these will increase in frequency and severity over time. There's a lot of reasons why this can happen. There's not just one. This doesn't have to be genetics. It can be genetics. There can be pieces of this that are genetically influenced. It can be due to early childhood or early puppyhood experiences that contribute to this. Right? Throughout our lives, throughout animals' lives, like us being an animal and dogs being an animal, throughout dogs' lives, they're experiencing all kinds of events potentially that are rewiring their brains. They're rewiring the chemistry of their bodies. If you're not convinced of this, you read The Body Keeps the Score, where the author talks quite a bit about how trauma rewires our body and how our body keeps the score on things like that. So we're kind of constantly experiencing these things, and there can be environmental factors. There can be these events, these potentially traumatic events that are rewiring how our body processes things. So there's a lot of reasons why this might be happening. You can also have cases that look like impulsive aggression, but they're actually just trained. It originated as defensive aggression and is built into impulsive aggression, usually by ineffective training strategies, confusing communication, ignoring those early warning signs, teaching the dog they're not allowed to communicate. You can have a lot of things kind of contribute to it, but ultimately you're going to wind up with this impulsive aggression. Lots of reasons here. Again, if you'd like to read more about this, it's in this textbook, Applied Dog Behavior and Training, Volume 3 by Stephen R. Lindsay. Great textbook. I bought this at the start of my dog training career, and I still find stuff to pull out of it every once in a while, and I'm still referencing it to this day. So a great reference. So what do we do? What do we do when we talk about aggression? What do we do in response to what do we do for these cases, right? We want to treat this. We want to manage this at the very least. So I've referenced management and treatments. This is what we're talking about. Management is just not letting the dog practice this behavior. It's not letting the dog experience, like it's trying to avoid the situations where the dog is doing this behavior. So management, for a lot of new dog trainers, management is the solution. Right? Whenever I see like pull the dog off to the side, give them a lot of treats for sitting off to the side. That's fantastic. That's a great management step. It's not necessarily treating the underlying emotional response to the stimulus. And that's how we get to treatment. But management is usually our first step in treatment. It's very, very difficult to live with a dog that is exhibiting these behaviors. It is really, really hard. to live with a dog that could bite somebody. That's stressful for the person, that's talking about trauma that can be potentially traumatic for the person. We want to recognize that, we want to honor that, and we want to give somebody some management tools that help them stop this behavior today. That might be a lot of crate time, right? We want to be reasonable about how much crate time we can handle, but that might be crates, it might be baby gates, it might be muzzles. I'm going to link to the Muzzle Up project. Love the Muzzle Up project. There's some great resources on their website about muzzle training. So muzzles, crates, baby gates, avoiding going for walks. Not all dogs need walks. It's okay to not take your dog for a walk if this is the permission you needed to stop taking your dog for a walk. If both you and your dog hate going for walks, please stop going for walks. You don't need to go out there and do that. There are plenty of things around the house that you can do. So we want to manage that behavior first and foremost. If your dog hates seeing other dogs out on a walk, we're going to stop going for walks, or we're going to pick a different time to go for a walk that we're unlikely to encounter other dogs. We're also going to need some trained behaviors there. I like an emergency U-turn. So rewarding the dog for turning the opposite direction very quickly. I want to practice those kind of things, or sitting off to the side of the trail looking at me, touch targets, treat party, throwing a bunch of treats on the ground. Lots of great trainers have lots of great management strategies. Some of them that start contributing, they start building to a treatment protocol. I want to establish those first outside of the context where I need them. So this is going back to that generalization step. I don't want to throw the dog into the situation where they need these survival skills. They need these basic behaviors. I don't want to teach them in that stressful context where they need them. I teach them at home, then outside, then down the street, then in context, then I desensitize, right? I'm slowly building the intensity of it until I get to the point where my dog is managed well enough that I don't have to think about it too much after that. This is enough for many dog owners, and that is totally fair. Not everybody needs to advance to treatment. Most people are totally comfortable with management. As long as we've got really strong management skills in place, plenty of people are totally comfortable with that, but it doesn't mean that it's treated. And I want us as dog trainers to understand the difference between management and treatment. No, I don't always have to go to management, but I should not be telling people that this behavior is treated when I've really just managed it. So what are we talking about when we talk about treatment? Treatment is usually long-term. This usually is, I can kind of like let the dog make their own choices, and the dog will make a choice totally absent of me that is more in line with what I want them, the choice that I want them to make. Treatment options address the function of the behavior. It addresses the why. It addresses why the dog was doing this in the first place. Treatment usually modifies the underlying emotions or the thought patterns or the ideas and the biological processes. I've said this so many times. Addresses that biological response to the stimulus. It changes what the dog's biological response is. And probably, going back to fear, it probably teaches the dog that if they are scared, this is what they do instead of what they were previously doing. Because why do dogs do what they do? The dogs do what they do because it works. Usually teaches coping skills. We'll talk about coping skills in a different lecture. That's kind of my personal thing. My personal bias in that is I want to teach the dog a way to cope with that. It's basically what I'm getting at in the previous example. Teaching the dog that if you are scared, you can do this. If you feel angry, you can do that. If you feel frustrated, you can do that. If you feel anxious, you can do this. That's my construct of coping skills that I have built. So that's my personal bias. So I won't go too much into that right now. Okay, looking at some examples of management, I referenced baby gates, crates, muzzles, all fantastic management solutions, not treating the underlying cause of the behavior, but it is managing it. Same thing goes for some management behaviors, going off to the side of the trail, asking my dog for a sit and look at me and rewarding my dog for looking at me, management. We're introducing a little bit of counter conditioning. And if we set up our situation well, we might even be doing some habituation and desensitization. So it might be getting at the fear. But if the behavior is not rooted in fear, then it's not actually treatment. So we have to identify why the dog is doing something in order to effectively treat it. I don't have to really know why the dog's doing something to manage it, right? I don't want you lunging at people out on a walk. We're going to get enough space that you won't physically be able to lunge at people on the walk. That's management. And again, it might be enough for some people. Treatment's going to look a little bit more complex. Treatment is going to look like really identifying, diving deep into why the dog is doing this. It's probably going to be a little bit of trial and error. It's going to be a little bit of, could it be this? Well, let's test it out and see. If it's fear, I should see a reduction of fear if I counter condition and desensitize. It's not fear. The problem seems to be getting worse. Okay, maybe it's actually frustration. Maybe they want something and they can't have it. Maybe it's actually a specific targeted sort of predatory behavior. In which case, reducing fear is going to do nothing for that predatory behavior. If we're dealing with predatory behavior, we want to look at some resources from Simone Mueller on predation substitution training. That's some great options for both management and treatment. So treatment's going to look at the why. Why is the dog doing this? How can I change how the dog feels about this stimulus? Okay. LAT, if you're not familiar with Look at That, LAT, fantastic, amazing. Love that as a first step. I've got a training client right now that I started them on that, like, I think first or second session, first hands-on session, definitely. We started doing Look at That. Great foundational skill. We are teaching the dog to look at whatever it is, reward them for looking away from it. Look at it, look away from it. Look at it, look away from it. Look at it, look away from it. Look at it, gather information about it. Change what you think about it. Right now, the story you're telling yourself about the situation, the narrative that the dog has built in their head, not literally, but the thoughts that are going through the dog's head are that thing is a threat. Right? I'm going to try to reduce the threat. LAT buys you some of that time to look at whatever it is, learn about it. And we should be doing it, pairing that with desensitization, a little bit of counter conditioning and habituation. Behavior adjustment training, BAT, I already linked to Chris Stewart, but I'm going to link to Chris Stewart again in this one. Behavior adjustment training is her training protocol. It's fantastic. Totally changed the way that I train dogs. Amazing. Love it. Fantastic. Constructional aggression treatment is what Chris Stewart's BAT is based on. So we've got LAT, BAT, and CAT, like putting those all together. They're all kind of related to one another. They've all got kind of a similar idea. Constructional aggression treatment was kind of the early stages of BAT, where instead of asking the dog to remove themselves, we removed the stimulus dog. CAT's also gone through a couple of iterations. There's a fantastic book that is usually up there, but it looks like I brought it somewhere. Someone else is borrowing it. Oh, no, it's right here. Turning Fierce Dogs Friendly. I will link to this book as well. Turning Fierce Dogs Friendly is all about cats, that constructional aggression treatment. Kelly Snyder wrote that up. So be familiar with those three things. If you have any intention of working with aggression cases, you should be familiar with those three things, even if you don't end up using those treatment protocols, and maybe you adapt them to fit what you are most comfortable with. Maybe you're not comfortable with a long leash, so you figure out how to adapt BAT for a short leash. Maybe you don't have the ability to set it up every time to remove the stimulus dog, but you can do it sometimes. So we take a little bit of that, we teach a little bit of this over here. We want to have options available for dog owners to be able to find what works for them. So we want to have these tools in our back pocket. These are the tools that we want. These are the tools. When I'm referencing tools, this is what I'm talking about. I can plot a handout about LAT. I can direct people to Grisha Stewart's resources on BAT, or I can direct them over to Kelly Snyder's research on constructional aggression treatment. Look these up. I will link to these in the video description as well, so you can review them. The other things we want to do alongside these three treatment protocols when we're looking at treatment is modifying the environment. Again, that goes back to that humane hierarchy, that first stage up there. Can we modify the environment? Can we offer some predictability? Can we offer some choices to the dog, right? You don't have to keep walking towards that of the dog. You can walk over this way. You don't have to greet that person. You don't have to say hi to that person. You can stand back here behind me. Or you can stand to this side of me or that side of me, or you can walk over there and lay down. There's some options in that. We can teach coping skills, which is again, my construct that I'll go over in a different lecture there. I hope that if you have any intention of working with aggression cases, that you do a lot of research and a lot of study, a lot of studying up on people that are fantastic at this. Grisha Stewart, Kelly Snyder, and LAT training are fantastic starts. There's all kinds of stuff you can do. You should be familiar with a wide range of behaviors, a wide range of training protocols or what's out there so that you can take little pieces from here and there and know why you're choosing each of those pieces and why you're omitting other parts of it. Make sure that we're not just picking what we like to do and leaving really important pieces behind. Make sure you understand the why of why we're doing some of these things. And make sure we know if we're managing or treating and make sure we communicate that. We're honest about that with people. Hey, we're going to manage this. Management is going to feel really good. It's how we're going to start. If you're interested in continuing training into treatment, I'm in full support. I'd be more than happy to do that with you. Know that it might take a little bit longer. It might be a little bit more intense. But I just want to be totally upfront about what management versus treatment looks like. We've got to be honest with our dog owners. This is a big, big topic with all kinds of little nuances and tiny details to it. This really benefits from classroom discussion. So make sure that you sign up for a coffee supporter. Make sure you become a member on Coffee and get into our Discord group and start talking about this kind of stuff if you're really serious about taking on these cases. Or if you're starting to take cases and you just want some backup support on it, that's exactly what I want this network here for. We'd love to be your backup and allow you to take those cases. See you next time.